Thank you. Hello. Oh, there you go. All right. Just really quick on the 2019 Denver amendments, IFC and smoke control. I was on the fire and the mechanical committee. Just really quick, the IFC amendments have about 240 pages out of 575 total pages out of the Denver amendments. Is the most exciting part of the code, and maybe the least, but anyway. Before we go over so obviously there's a lot of material to cover in a very short time, so I'm just going to touch on some of the chapters that as building owners you should probably pay attention to. But the number one item that is very, very important to pay attention to is that for existing buildings, you need to establish the code year that your building CO is under. That's actually a very big deal because what's happening is under a new code cycle, the code might say you don't need to have smoke control on a first floor retail building. But your building may have smoke control for the first floor retail. You cannot just eliminate that based on the new code. The building needs to comply with the code that was building and CO under. So that's an issue that comes up a few times every year when the building was not, it didn't used to have sprinklers and it had to be fully detected. Somehow they added sprinklers midway, and now somebody removed the smoke detectors without an agreement or permission from the fire department. So this is really a big deal. So if you have an existing building, you can see the new fire code amendments, but those don't necessarily apply to you, okay? So that's very important. So I'm just going to walk through fairly quick some of the chapters. So on chapter 3 is dealing with rooftop gardens and landscape roofs. You have to be aware that there's some limitations on vegetated roof materials as far as combustibles and trays and all that, the material associated with that. It requires some fire access to the vegetated roof. And then there's some restrictions with regards to life safety fence. So I believe it's probably 20 feet, how close you can be basically to a life safety fan. Chapter 4 is a very important chapter for existing buildings. It's basically emergency planning and preparedness. It kind of gives you a guideline with regards to how you call the fire department. You need to do evacuation drills, lockdowns, and they also offer training for the facility manager for the building. Chapter 5, for a new building, it gives you guidelines on fire apparatus access roads. It has a very nice table and some diagrams. On this code cycle, we added the fire command room. So it's not the fire command center, it's a fire command room. It's very important, the name. So basically, if you have an emergency voice alarm communication room, and you're using that to take credit for egress or for whatever reason you're using it for, it needs to be inside a room. It's about 48 square feet, the minimum, and it requires a 1-hour rating. So that's very important. And under that section, once you have that room, you can also have the emergency generator or the fire alarm panel. And that's basically for low-rise buildings. If you have a high-rise building, you'll have a fire command center. Chapter 9 is it's actually the most important chapter, in my opinion, of the fire code. It deals with fire protection. So I picked 909, the smoke control system, because that's probably one of the most important chapters as well. So on this code cycle, the stair and the hoistway fan capacity get reduced 10 to 20%. So what's happening is about 20 years ago, for example, for a corridor on a type R occupancy, you're required to have 60 air changes per hour, and then the buildings are getting tighter and tighter. Right now, it is 15 air changes per hour. So new buildings, they do a very good job compared to a few years ago as far as sealing the stairs. So actually, even those numbers that they have right now in the code, when we actually test the building, we use maybe 50% of that. So slowly, they're coming down as we go. And then on this code cycle, it kind of clarified the makeup air required for if you're in a smoke control mode and you're exhausting a floor, you can open one stair to get 40% of the makeup air that you need, which is in an office space is 5 air changes per hour. For a type R occupancy is 15 air changes per hour. And then after the fire, for salvage and overhaul, 80%. And that's up to the fire department to get to that number. 912 applies to new and existing buildings. So what's happening is there were a lot of vandalism and people were putting bottles inside the fire department connections. So now the fire department is requiring you to purchase a locking connection cap so nobody can put stuff inside. And it's not that expensive, actually. It's pretty good. 921.22, it was probably one of the most exciting amendments we passed. It was basically, if you're trapped on the elevator, the elevator service company is required to respond with 1 hour of notice. So what happened is there are a lot of elevator entrapments, and the fire department gets the call, and they had people stuck on the elevator for 4 or 5 hours with no response. So there's an amendment now that they're obligated to pass, for somebody to respond and be on site within 1 hour. I'm not quite sure exactly how that is going to get enforced from the city, but the amendment is there. Chapter 39, if you're planning to go to the marijuana business, that's a good chapter to read. Denver was a pioneer on that. Actually, Denver probably wrote the code, most of the code on the IFC regarding the marijuana operations, a couple of the guys from the local fire department. And they have gone, Chapter 39 is an upgrade to the existing code, basically, and it just got adopted. Appendix N is a very important chapter that, or appendix that you need to take a look. It's basically, it outlines the requirement for the deferred submittal permits. So if you're, that very often gets missed during new construction projects. So if you're going to do an emergency generator, you need to pull 2 permits. One is to place the generator, and the second permit is to fuel it. And what's happening is the job is moving forward, and somehow that, it gets forgotten that you need to pull that permit. And that permit can take a long time to get secured. And we had buildings where they were ready for TCO, and we still didn't have a permit for the generator. So on Appendix N, it gives you 14 steps of what you need to submit. And the best thing of doing that is basically take the Appendix N, I think for the generator is 103.13, and just provide them exactly what they need. Once you do that, then you should be able to get the permit with very few comments. It also has the requirements for the sprinkler permits, the fire alarm permits, and other deferred permits as well. And then there's a last is the tiny houses that came on the architectural amendments, and it went to the fire as well with regards to the sprinklers, but it's basically an occupancy RX. It's for buildings that are less than 400 square feet. They start having those quite a bit. So if they want to house many people in a large piece of land, they just build those 400 square feet. It's probably a tough shed or something, and but there's an amendment there that don't require to have sprinklers. On the mechanical side and the plumbing, the Denver amendments is a very, very short section, maybe 10 pages long. There's like three, on the mechanical, 5 or 6, it basically, it gives you an exception not to provide a 2-hour rated enclosure for grease ducts and pollution control units. Some of the specifics are there. And then with regards to filtration too, 607.3 damper testing. So under the 15 code, somehow it got written on the code that the radiation dampers, and radiation dampers are dampers that are basically attached to one layer of drywall to protect the ceiling assembly. They needed to be dynamic, and there was really no manufacturer that at least I could find that they were making dynamic rated dampers, and that was an issue for a while. So right now there's an amendment that says that if you interlock the fan coil unit or air handling unit with the smoke detector, then you can use a regular radiation damper. It doesn't need to be dynamic because there's no fan to it. And on the plumbing amendments, there's an amendment to regarding single-user, multi-user, and all-gender toilet facilities. And then storm drainage. The previous code used the area versus the GPM, and I think using the area was a good idea. So there's an amendment to use the previous code. So anyway, that's about it. Thank you.